Welcome, everyone. This is Career Happy Hour. I'm Andrew Beach, Executive Career Coach. I'm a teacher of self-education. I help professionals like you communicate your value so you can find great opportunities faster, whether you're working or not. Today, we're continuing book club. If you have any questions, of course, put those in the chat. I'm happy to answer, whether you're looking for some feedback on branding, networking, market planning, resume if you must, LinkedIn best practices, interview prep, whatever considers your career, I'm happy to answer those questions. Go ahead and leave those on the chat. Whether you're joining us today by YouTube or Periscope or LinkedIn Live or even in my Facebook group, How to Find Jobs Without a Resume. So we're continuing the talk about my favorite book on networking. And I hope it's okay that I'm sitting down today. The last couple times that I did this standing up, my arm started, anyway, I need to work out some more, I think. But let me know if you have any questions. Put those in the chat and I'll answer them later on in today's session. Because today we're continuing our talk about my favorite book, the National Business Employment Weekly book on networking. It's a series of books that the Wall Street Journal and their associates put together. I think there's one on interviewing, one on resume. Anyhow, there's plenty of these out there for you to take a look at, but the one that I think is the best, and each of them I think has a different author. This one is actually Douglas B. Richardson. We're continuing our discussion of Chapter 2. So let's get to talking about some of the things that we're continuing to discuss. We discussed Chapter 1, which really covered what is networking and why do you need to do it and how does it work and what is it not. And then we jumped into Chapter 2 where we did a lot of internal reflection. And so we're going to continue that discussion today to complete Chapter 2. Then we'll go on to Chapter 3 next week. Let me know your impressions on this series, and I'd love to get your feedback and see how we can make this better. So let's get started. Cataloging transferable abilities and personal qualities. As noted earlier in this chapter, Chapter 2, there are a variety of approaches to trying to develop a realistic perspective on your aptitudes, abilities, personal qualities, and operative values. Your local bookstore and your library stock many books that offer a self-scoring profile. All of these profiles have the virtue of forcing you to look at yourself systematically. Keep in mind, however, that anyone is allowed to try to sell anything, and many profiles' validity, do they in fact measure what they claim to measure, and reliability, do they produce consistent results across a large statistical sample, are suspect. A danger with some so-called personality tests, particularly the kind that you find tucked into Cosmopolitan or Penthouse, is that you may compromise validity for simplicity. Be sure that the instrument you use to guide your future has been created by someone who isn't making up theory as he goes along, or hasn't been told by the magazine's editor that the test should be skewed and to make people feel good. In addition to the self-help books and proliferating self-assessment computer software packages, plenty of outside purveyors of the psyche stand ready to help you to get the fix on the real you. There are a varied lot, psychologists administering batteries of assessment instruments and projective testing. Career consultants using their experience and judgment, that would be me, perhaps enhanced by some time-honored interest in personal style inventories. Yeah, those are valid. So, I mean, the ones that we would use would be like Myers-Briggs or Standout, StrengthsFinder. There's a whole host of them, Enneagram, DISC. And then there's the charlatans spreading you with their own brand of processed cheese. Even your favorite uncle who seems capable of assessing your character and career prospects in 5 words or less. Before you invest time and money in other forms of vocational assessment, there's one classic exercise you ought to try to begin to acquaint yourself with yourself. As part of the vocational assessment process they work through with their clients, almost all career consultants and outplacement counselors use some variation of the past accomplishments exercise. That is true. You've probably heard of STARS, CARS, PARS. I mean, there's a lot of acronyms that describe this, but really it's just your anecdotal evidence of success that demonstrates your competency. I recommend it highly, and I suggest that you enlist the help of a family member or a coach, a friend, a fellow job seeker to provide you with some objectivity. Objectivity is the key as you work through it. The problem is you're often too close to yourself to see yourself, if that makes sense. In postulating what he called the pleasure principle, Sigmund Freud touched on a fairly obvious psychological fact. When people experience something they find satisfying, they will, consciously or unconsciously, try to find other situations where whatever produced the pleasure can find expression again. They will, in fact, keep feeding their preferences. By feeding them, they reinforce them. People's past experiences tend to include sizable doses of what they are capable of doing, as in transferable abilities, and what they find enjoyable, which means personal qualities. If you take the time to look carefully at the 10 to 15 accomplishments in your adult life, whether work-related or not, that's key. Not every accomplishment or thing that you did came from work. It could have been a personal achievement that gave you the most intense satisfaction. You'll see reflected in them a veritable inventory of both your transferable abilities and your personal preferences. This apparently simplistic exercise starts with an innocuous instruction. So if you're ready, here's the innocuous instruction. Jot down a brief description of 10 to 15 accomplishments in your adult life that meet two simple criteria. The two criteria are: 1, I did it well, and 2, I found it enjoyable or satisfying. So I did it well, and I found it enjoyable or satisfying. Accomplishments may come from work or from other activities in your life. Write them down in any order as they come to mind. Many people report some difficulty at this stage. I can't think of anything major or important that I've done. This complaint is a signal that they're not focusing on events that have motivated or pleased them, but rather on things that external judges would find impressive. The point here is to identify events or activities that stick in your mind as satisfying memories, even if they might seem trivial to someone else. You have permission to do so. The next step is to arrange your accomplishments in priority order. My instruction for this step usually goes, if I look at all your accomplishments away from you, save one, which one, for any reason at all that's important to you, would you choose to keep? Then, which one be second, third, fourth, and so on? It's a prioritization exercise, whatever works for you. After you've arranged your accomplishments in your own priority order, enlist your helper to disassemble each accomplishment into its most important factors. This exercise is often called factoring. First, summarize the accomplishment for your helper. Describe the situation that led up to the accomplishment, the activities you performed to make it happen, and the result of your activities. Okay, all of these frameworks are pretty much the same. Your helper should then cross-examine you in great detail about what went into this accomplishment and should take notes about the skills and abilities the cross-examination reveals. Here is a possible script. This is what the helper would ask you. What exactly did you do to make this happen? What did you do first? And what did you do next? Be specific. What did you do after that? Second question. Why did you find this activity satisfying? Did you derive great satisfaction from the process or the outcome? What kind of accomplishment is this? Self-development? Mastery of new skills? Intellectual curiosity? Helping others? Entrepreneurial? Management? Troubleshooting? Overcoming adversity? Exceeding others' expectations? Researching? Organizing things? Organizing people? Getting measurable results? Winning over others? Question 3. What does this accomplishment say about you? If it's a valid example of your abilities, what abilities does it reflect? If it reflects personal strengths or values, which ones? So really that's a way for your objective third party, and that could be a coach like me, or a friend or someone else going through a career transition, a mentor, someone that's objective, not too close, that can give you objective feedback and ask you probing questions to better understand. So think about somebody that's good at that kind of thing, at pulling the truth out of you. As your helper lists the factors reflected in each accomplishment, encourage him to use brief phrases anchored in the past tense verbs. Let's say you are factoring this accomplishment. Quote, took over an underperforming West Coast sales teams and turned them into the company's top performers within 18 months. Your list of factors might look like this. Assessed needs, sized up the situation, interviewed a sales force, conducted attitude survey, conducted competitor and market analysis, analyzed internal operating procedures, and Salesforce support resources. Built trust among suspicious Salesforce, communicated candidly, encouraged feedback, admitted I needed their help, remained accessible, established priorities, developed better sales support, recruited motivated staff, improved communication, and so on. There's a whole list of things here. Get the idea? Factoring is difficult and slow at first. Its toughest lesson is to refrain from talking in abstractions and instead to define your past accomplishments in terms of specific, observable behaviors. Again, that's specific, observable behaviors. The question I like to use is, if I was looking at you from the outside, what would I see you doing? Once you've factored your number one accomplishment, move on to number two, number three, and so on, using exactly the same technique. What you'll find immediately is that some activities repeat. Initiated new program, assessed needs, developed strategic plan, and so on. You'll also note that certain personal qualities keep showing up. Autonomy, perseverance, taking on new challenges, creativity, or human-oriented values, for example. According to Freud, this repetition is no accident. The point is, the whole factoring process is to see what activities, abilities, and personality traits seek and find expression repeatedly in the things you've done well and enjoyed. Suppose that among your 15 accomplishments, some form of initiative, quote, developed plan, started company, invented process, initiated discussions, occurs 12 times. Do you think that's a coincidence? Hardly. You therefore are entitled to say to a networking contact or potential employer, I have a lot of initiative. Your past acts prove it. You should also understand that if initiative occurs 12 to 15 times, it had better be an instrumental part of your next job. If you ignore an ability or personal quality that you've used and enjoyed in the past, you're going to starve a part of you that's been well fed in the past. Other self-assessment tools. Once you've completed the past accomplishments exercise, you may feel that you have a clear view of your transferable abilities and personal qualities to complete your self-assessment template. Commit it to memory and leap right into the networking fray. If so, fine, go for it. In many people, however, this exercise sparks a hunger for a deeper and more objective look at themselves. That's where the other self-assessment instruments, software programs, and career counselors can come in, and some of your dollars go out. Instruments for charting personality characteristics, interest patterns, and operative values are too numerous to list here. There are hundreds of them, but some of the most popular ones are essentially stereotyping tools derived from the thinking of psychoanalyst Carl Jung, who posited four-dimensional personality orientations. 1, thinker. 2, feeler. 3, intuitor. And 4, sensor. Jung then looked at the types of people and situations that fed or frustrated these types. One of the oldest and most widely known of these instruments is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI, taken by tens of thousands of people worldwide and continually refined to become something of an industry standard. The MBTI is based on Jungian types and purports to measure personal preferences across 4 dimensions. Style of thinking and ordering information is number 1. Number 2, principles that shape the decision-making process. Number 3, strength of desire for order, control, and closure, or their opposites, spontaneity and variety. And 4, whether you draw and direct your energy from outside or inside. Although I'm a Myers-Briggs user and fan, I can see why the instrument has its ardent critics. Actually, the problem is less with the instrument and with the overly simplistic way in which it's often interpreted. The instrument profiles a person in terms of one of 16 four-letter types that resemble license plates. I've run into a lot of people who wear those license plates around their necks like dog tags and use them to restrict, not expand, their self-understanding. The MBTI and similar instruments are descriptive, not prescriptive, and are best used to identify your comfort zones, not to tell you what to do with your life. Yes, indeed, you could take a lot of different assessments. The objective would be to find something positive to take away and apply. Many people ardently resent being stereotyped in any way and will stridently assert their absolute individuality. These same people, however, may need to be reminded that calling someone a genius, a team player, a dork, or a dweeb also is a form of stereotyping. We all stereotype others all the time, and except when used inappropriately, stereotypes have the benefit of allowing us to think in terms of categories. Stereotypes exist because they have some utility to whoever is using them. To its credit, the MBTI is a statistically validated and value-neutral stereotyping instrument. The Strong Interest Inventory, previously called the Strong Campbell, frequently is used by career counselors in conjunction with MBTI because of the two tend to work hand in glove. The MBTI is an abstract representation of certain preferences. The Strong Interest Inventory maps how these preferences tend to express themselves in terms of degree of interest in specific occupations, activities, people, and areas of knowledge. There are many other similar instruments. Some are elegant and easy to remember. Others are complex, confusing, and virtually impossible to process and digest. The thing to remember about all of them is that, like mirrors, they reflect back what you project onto them. None is clairvoyant or magical. All are susceptible to some distortion. If you ever feel that the results being fed back on one of these instruments are wrong, gee, I never thought I was an introvert, but if the test says I am, I guess I must be. The instrument is wrong. Skilled career counselors generally use a variety of instruments, and that's true, or information gathering approaches. They're looking for cross-validation of the reflections back from the mirror. No instrument or battery of instruments will tell you exactly what you should do with your life, and none list the thousands of vocational options that may be appropriate for a particular vocational profile. What the instruments can do, however, is help you identify the identify the type of role you're best suited for, a setting where your strengths are appreciated and well utilized, and colleagues with whom you'd enjoy working day in and day out. Perhaps even more to the point, the instruments often make clear what you shouldn't do. They describe activities, situations, or roles, or people with which you have no affinity or interest. If this seems a backward approach to self-assessment, think of this parallel. When a doctor attempts to pinpoint what ails a patient, he usually uses a rule-out diagnosis. Instead of trying to identify the disease immediately, he first eliminates as many categories of illness as he can. That approach creates a more refined and focused universe of viable possibilities, and it significantly diminishes the risk of a misdiagnosis. Or in the job seeker's case, a misfit. Stated another way, quantitative assessment instruments can help you be true to thine own self by providing generic descriptions of what motivates you and what turns you off. When it comes time to start networking, any information that reduces the amount of territory you have to explore is invaluable. Meaning, if you know yourself well, then it's easy to communicate that to others. The battle between role and soul. I like this part. This is where it gets really good. Many of us find it difficult to stay clear of jobs and activities we shouldn't do or shouldn't even think about because strong external forces may be shoving us in the wrong direction. In their struggle to know themselves, people often can't distinguish between their soul, meaning the traits and preferences that define their basic temperament, and their role, all the other outside factors that impinge on their judgment. What results is the classic recipe for career unrest. In an effort to please parents, spouses, and peers, to live up to socioeconomic expectations and myths, to try to copy the success of others, or to generally remain above reproach. People choose careers that are strikingly at odds with their essential nature, often without knowing they're doing it. Unless we're gifted with the world-class objectivity, we find it hard to distinguish what we really want from what we really think we want. From what we really think we ought to want, from what others tell us we should want, and from what's realistic to want. Is it any wonder that when trying to figure out ourselves and set career objectives and priorities, we can't tell whether we're driving or being driven? Fair point. The dark side of the moon. The primary thrust of this chapter has been to help you define the most marketable skills, experiences, personal qualities, temperamental traits, and other positive factors to attract employer interest. When both networking and interviewing, you must be focused, succinct, and better than your competitors in highlighting your positive features. A good self-assessment will clarify what you have to sell. That's why all job searches really start internal. However, as long as you're completing this self-scrutiny, it behooves you to have an honest, objective look at the dark side of the moon. That is, this is getting good, your vulnerable soft spots, aversions, deficits, and areas of rigidity or inflexibility. It's unpleasant to catalog things or situations that make you uncomfortable. It's tough to confess that you're an imperfect creature. Nonetheless, these factors are an integral part of your vocational profile, and you don't make them disappear by ignoring them. In figuring out what to buy in your career, as opposed to looking solely at what you can sell, understand the difference between motivations and compensations. Motivation is positive, active energy composed of raw, primary enthusiasm. It's gasoline thrown on the fire. It's up, forward, wanting more. It's fun. Compensations represent the flip side. They're the accommodations you make to stay away from pain and vulnerability, to circumvent your demons and shortcomings, and to incorporate your glitches and blips into a life and work style that don't make you miserable. When psychologists speak of someone being well compensated, they're not talking about making the big dollars. They're describing someone who's able to integrate his strengths and weaknesses into an operative style and a set of life choices that free him up to pursue his motivations. A fundamental principle here is worth emphasizing. You cannot consistently tap into the energy provided by your sources of motivation until you first address those areas and issues that require compensation. Indeed, we have a label for people who display enormous energy directed primarily at compensation. We call them driven. And behind their backs, we agree that they aren't having much fun. Understanding your soft spots and incorporating them into the product you want to sell to employers doesn't mean that you must don a hair shirt, take yourself out of the noonday sun, and proclaim to the world, "I'm defective, unworthy, and weak." Make that approach the basis of your networking, and no one in his right mind will refer you to any further contacts. This chapter is talking about fit, so let's bag the idea of weak versus strong and bad versus good is unproductive. Personal qualities are neither bad nor good per se. They're simply functional or dysfunctional, depending on the context in which they emerge. A strength in one setting is often a deficit in another. A person might be labeled as a critic by a critic as unassertive, disorganized, not detail-oriented, vague, abstract, and impulsive, and by a fan as consensus-building, flexible, not hung up on trivia, visionary, creative, and spontaneous. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. The important thing to remember right there is that if you display yourself as you are to an outside party and they don't like what you have to offer, then that's self-selecting. That's going to work itself out. However, if there's someone across from you that has a need for what you have to offer, It's a win-win. Everybody is in a better condition. Instead of worrying about labels, think instead about what your temperamental qualities imply in terms of the kind of role you want and could work in comfortably. When you hold a mirror of the truth up to yourself, you may want to do some relabeling to make the glass half full rather than half empty. That's okay. The idea isn't to kid yourself or paint everything with rose-colored brush. Describe your attributes neutrally and objectively so that you can use them to determine whether a particular job is a good fit. Shy away from yourself, it's called denial, at this crucial point and you'll get what you deserve, a job or career where you're always striving to compensate, make up for, and where your motivations seem to go forever unsatisfied. That's sad. So putting it all together, the 2-minute drill. This is where they talk a little bit about how to introduce yourself. Some would call that a branding statement. So this is really they call it a 2-minute drill. That's a lot of time. Many branding statements in a networking interaction shouldn't be really more than 30 seconds. You can insert other components of the 2-minute drill throughout the conversation, but I would look to break that up into smaller chunks. So putting it all together, the 2-minute drill. Let's say you work through a diligent, realistic self-assessment. You catalog your skills, abilities, hot buttons, and blind spots and entered them dutifully on your template. See Table 2.1. If you want me to recreate this table in a Google Doc, I can do that. Now, when you hear the request, tell me about yourself, you're armed and ready. But all this assessment has taken place behind closed doors. You're now filled with the insight of self-awareness. It's time to face the final challenge, open up the hangar doors, wheel your product profile out into the sunlight, and see whether you can articulate it succinctly and confidently to somebody else. Your final step in pre-networking preparation is to pull all this information together in a short, coherent, interesting, and memorable narrative, and practice delivering it calmly and confidently on demand. A crucial step at the outset of any networking meeting is for you to give the contact enough information about you without blathering on interminably or burying him in detail, that he can put you into perspective. You should outline and practice what many career counselors call the 2-minute drill, a brief introductory summary that covers level, role and function, and setting, as well as your transferable skills, technical skills, and personal qualities. Your summary doesn't have to be confined to 2 minutes, but if it stretches out past 5, you're probably going into too much detail or sliding into a sales pitch. Good point. In today's real world, you have to add 2 additional bits of information. 1, the tail. Why are you in the job market? Why are you making a career shift, etc.? And 2, the objective statement. What do you want to do next? We'll talk about these 2 components in Chapter 5 when we discuss the form and content of a network meeting. For the moment, it's enough to know that the job market is a skeptical, defensive, and overcrowded place, and that projecting a clear focus to a networking contact will involve addressing the issue of why this, why now. Even though it adds to the stress, let's emphasize that your 2-minute drill has to be interesting as well as succinct. This is your soundtrack. If you can't communicate interest in what you're presenting, no one will be interested in it either. There's a common tendency among networkers to rattle off a sequential list of past jobs and hope the contact will draw all the proper inferences. That approach is not good enough. Your summary statement should cover why you made the career decisions you did, what parts of your work you really enjoyed, and what aspects you can do without in the future. Feel free to comment on your prior decisions and explain where you were well focused and what you should have given more weight. But remember, if you can help it, no negatives. Any kind of negative sticks in the mind of the listener and dilutes the other messages being received. Keep the glass half full by avoiding negative droplets. I flunked out. I couldn't hack it. I hated the place and everyone in it. I had a problem. They fired me. I was asked to leave. Almost anything can be expressed in a value-neutral way. I took a semester off. We had different ways of doing things. It seemed like the thing to do at the time. I learned that I work more comfortably in less structured settings. It was clear to me that my long-term career prospects would be better served in another setting. Those are some examples. Let's have a look at a couple of 2-minute drills. One has been concocted, the other is highly disguised true life tale. Listen first to the hypothetical conventional job seeker. Here we go. Maybe the best place to start is to give you a quick thumbnail sketch of my background. I'm presently Vice President of Human Resources at Ajax, a $1 billion manufacturer of computer peripherals. I've had this job for about 4 years, although I've been with the company for 8. I came up through the comp and benefits side of the house. Along the way, I picked up a lot of expertise in pension planning and administration, ESOPs, executive incentive plans, and other approaches to financial benefits. They had me doing technical and executive recruiting for a while, and I learned how to write a decent job spec and interview well, but I was pleased when I got promoted to supervise that function, along with all recruiting, manpower, and succession planning, in addition to handling the restructuring of the company's approach to comp at all levels, rather than having to do it myself every day. This is where you might ask a question back. Just before I got promoted, there was a successful campaign to unionize our manufacturing floor staff, and we had a very hairy 6 months. I had to learn a lot about labor relations and employee relations on the fly because at the same time, I was called on to troubleshoot some crises that arose when we centralized our whole HR function after acquiring 2 other companies. I had found I had a real flair for labor relations, and I got a reputation even among the union reps for being reasonable and adaptable, and that has stood me in good stead. When my predecessor retired, they gave me the VP job on an interim basis to see if I would pick up all the soft side HR stuff. You know, organizational development, training, management development, team building, corporate culture, and strategic HR planning. I think the people who branded me as sort of a comp and benefit techie were pleasantly surprised at some of the programs I initiated and implemented. I was pretty aggressive in working to develop better communications, formal and informal, in the organization, and I even got the union to buy into some performance evaluation approaches you would have expected them to resist. I've really been enjoying myself in this job. It's a long way from Eagle River, Wisconsin, and a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. I might note that my early career was spent as an abstractor with a title company in Milwaukee. They were really nice folks, but I learned real fast that highly repetitive, quantitative stuff was not nearly as interesting to me as roles that focused on people rather than data. The company sponsored me for an executive MBA program several years ago, and I found that having a broader knowledge of operations, marketing, and finance really has helped me manage my function. It didn't make me want to flip over into general management, though. I really want to stay in this kind of work. However, a change may be in the offing. A large French conglomerate is poised to buy us out, and they have a history of replacing senior staff managers with their own people. I think it may be prudent to step out before I am pushed out, and I was hoping, even in a recession, to catch on with another rapid-growing manufacturing company, union or not, to head up their HR function. That was a lot. That's a lot of information backstory. So I would consider breaking that up a little bit and maybe getting to the point a little faster, to the punchline, if you will. It's all there. Level, role, function, setting, skills, abilities, temperament, what he liked most and liked least, educational background, reason for being in the job market, settlement of what he wants to do next. Same stuff, different place. Career shifters will look at this tight, lucid narrative and say, yeah, but this guy has it easy. He's a nice, easy to define product with a nice linear career path. What do you say if you're going to leave what you're doing for your prior career path has all sorts of bizarre twists and turns? That brings us to Calvin's story. That's the case study we're going to talk about. When you have a lot of explaining to do, or if your future focus isn't entirely clear, the best course is to develop a chronological narrative that explains step by step how you got where you are now. In such a narrative, it's particularly important to explain the reasons for your job transitions, as Calvin did in the following true life example. So for career changers, it actually makes sense to share a chronology, even though he mentioned earlier that just regurgitating your resume isn't a good idea. This is an informed presentation of that information. So here goes. Here's Calvin's story. I was born and raised in the South Bronx, the youngest of 5 kids. We didn't have much, so all us kids got self-reliant pretty early. I was sort of the angry young man in high school, but that was getting me nowhere. So I decided to get some credentials that I could use to ensure myself some economic security. I went to the University of Kansas and got a degree in mechanical engineering. My grades were very good, and I got hired straight out of school at Aramco, who sent me to Saudi Arabia to work on building new refineries. I found I was a natural at engineering project management, and by age 26, I was a project manager at a $60 million refinery construction project, managing people from a variety of cultures, disciplines, and backgrounds. I proved good at troubleshooting complex construction problems and at keeping a tight rein on costs, which won me some strokes with senior management. I was getting pretty removed from the U.S. mainstream, though, and when a $200 million plant was going to head didn't get built because of the Mideast economic climate, I decided to change course. I came back to the United States, got into Harvard Law, and did well. I got recruited by the Dallas office of the country's largest law firm, Big, Large, and Humongous, where I was involved in large lawsuits defending our clients, who generally were Fortune 100 corporations, in hostile takeover attempts and proxy fights. By doing this for a couple years, I learned a lot about business deals and finance, and I could see being involved in litigation wasn't where I wanted to take my life. So I accepted an offer to be a corporate lawyer, not a litigator, with a large Houston company, Strong and Hart, where I've been involved in general corporate practice and the part I like best, transactional work, that is, doing deals. What has become clear to me in doing this is that I like business more as a participant than as a specialized consultant. I've come to realize that I'm both autonomous and entrepreneurial by nature, and that I'm probably never going to be as comfortable in a large, structured setting as I am in doing my own thing. So it looks like I'm in the middle of making another major shift. I value what I've been learning as a corporate lawyer, but I've been talking with a variety of possible co-venturers about getting involved in one or more entrepreneurial activities. Perhaps venture capital, perhaps starting a small business investment company, marketing, construction, project management for a minority firm, or doing some real estate development. I'll never be better situated to take this kind of risk, so I've decided that my credentialing years are through and that it's time to build my career around the kinds of roles and activities I like the best. Whether I end up with the label of lawyer in my next role depends on whom I hook up with and what their needs are. So I thought that was actually a much better narrative than the prior one, the linear search. This gave us a lot more context. Just my opinion, of course, one man's opinion. What's your opinion on that one? Beyond the fact that this 2-minute drill gets a quart of information into a pint of pot of time, it's true, you should note something more. As the case with many career changers, it isn't possible for Calvin to put in a firm, clear label on the product he's selling. What he ends up doing next is going to depend on the people he meets while networking, where they send him, and what ideas they come up with. Calvin is hard to pigeonhole, and one of the initial priorities in his networking will be to get the information that will help him rule out unproductive directions and unrealistic expectations. He'll become better focused as he goes along. His 2-minute drill will tighten accordingly, and he'll feel less that he's at the mercy of a job market he can't control. That's a good point. So part of this is just diving in with the 2-minute drill that you have and then make adjustments. Each interaction you have with a person is going to lead you to more clarity around how to position and sell yourself. Calvin's 2-minute drill didn't just magically pop out as a coherent narrative. He worked through an intense career reappraisal with a career consultant. He took the time, perhaps for the first time in his life, to put his past choices in perspective and examine what they could tell him about his future. He outlined the 2-minute drill and practiced it with his wife and friends. He weathered a couple of sessions in front of the video camera in which he first felt as if I had rented lips. He got good. His story and motives became clear. He became confident, and he could recast and refocus his self-description on the fly and respond skillfully to bolts out of the blue. True, Calvin has a lot of skills, experience, and personal strengths to sell, but without the ability to synthesize his strengths and communicate them in a way that makes sense, Calvin would be unable to make the splash he deserves in the job market. So it is with all fledgling networkers, whether they're going to run a conventional job search or shift gears and direction, every networker reports that the process gets easier as you go along, that you become more focused and relaxed the more you do it. Hear, hear. But you have to start with a core of insight and then develop the ability to communicate that insight. So before forging ahead into matters of technique, do some valuable homework. Get to know thyself. That's chapter 2. That completes our book club today. Chapter 3 next week will be Who Should I See and Why Will They See Me? So it's really wrapping your head around identifying people to meet. So that's chapter 2. Let's see if we have any questions in the chat. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I did have some interesting things happen today. Well, actually this week. A lot of folks that I've been interacting with had interviews coming up. And they followed a process to prepare for those interviews on accident. So one of the services that I provide is a on-demand interview prep service. It's a 90-minute intensive preparation. And I had a gentleman go through that, and he's made, and I won't name names, but he's made it through the first two rounds at Amazon. And he's now going to, I think, be on site here shortly. Another gentleman I helped, actually, first round is now on site with Amazon. So getting better at this thing called interview prep with Amazon. So if that's you, go ahead and I guess you could go to my website, andrewbeach.com, and just look at under services. There should be some things there listed for coaching and interview prep. So that just seemed to be a lot of what was going on today. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer, whether it's regards to interviewing, networking, market planning, resume, market identification, LinkedIn best practice, that sort of thing. Happy to answer. Okay. Okay, I don't see any questions, so I'm going to wish you a happy weekend. This video actually will be posted up on YouTube, so if you want to see it, and review it later, go ahead and know that it's on YouTube as well as Periscope and my Facebook group. All right, guys, take care. Have a great weekend. Thank you for joining me on this Career Happy Hour Friday. Bye-bye.